I know this is a video a lot of you have been waiting for, so we gotta talk about Gojo, but spoilers if you're not caught up through chapter 257 of JJK. Alright, so as you all know by now, I think Gojo is coming back, and I've put out several videos going over all of the details, all of the evidence that I believe points to this. However, on April Fool's Day of this year, I put out a little bit of a prank video talking about a new theory and some new evidence for why Gojo was coming back. And that was just me having some fun. But the theory I presented in that video, which I'm going to go over here in a second in case you didn't see it, wasn't just pulled out of nowhere. I took actual evidence to make it the most compelling prank possible. But the reason it was a prank is because at the time, on April Fool's Day, it was just the inklings, just the beginnings of some potential evidence that may not go anywhere. But now, 3 weeks later, it keeps adding up. So that theory may actually hold some weight. Let's talk about it. Alright, so starting with Gojo's 50% discount, he took his exit from the manga, perhaps never to be seen again if he is truly gone, right? So he didn't show up for about 20 chapters, but then we got a Gojo sighting due to a flashback. So a flashback in and of itself, not necessarily a big deal. But again, there's some added intrigue here because it's the first time we've seen Gojo since his untimely demise. And on top of that, it just so happens to be in the chapter that is celebrating the 6-year anniversary of Jujutsu Kaisen. And Gege Akutami has been the type of author that really capitalizes on big moments like that, big milestones, whether it be an anniversary like this or a specific chapter number that has some deeper meaning in the story itself. Gege will use those type of influences. Okay, cool, but what does this have to do with Gojo coming back? Well, strap in, because to talk about that, we need to reference this panel. And again, if you haven't seen my full videos breaking down all of the evidence for why I think Gojo's coming back, this is part of that, and I can give you a more in-depth explanation there if you're curious. But for the purposes of this video, we need to talk about just this element, because in this panel, as you can see, there are 7 lotus flowers. And in Buddhism, there is a bunch of symbolism with lotus flowers and Buddha, obviously, which Gojo is a parallel to in this story, the honored one, right? Gojo has been a parallel to Buddha far before he passed away, so this isn't just something that's coming out of nowhere, right? And so these flowers in this panel were an intentional choice by Gege. And as you can see up here, if you wish to make yourself anew, go north, just like Gojo is faced with this choice of going north or south, right? And when Buddha went north, he took 7 steps and 7 lotus flowers bloomed in its wake. So the important thing we're taking from here is that in order for Gojo to be reborn, there need to be 7 steps north. So ever since Gojo became vertically challenged and people theorized that he might come back, they have been searching for how Gege might interpret those 7 steps north symbolically within the manga. Could Gojo come back 7 days later? Might he show up 7 chapters later? A lot of these have been proven false by now, but I think there's another interpretation that could make sense if all of this was true. Maybe Gojo's 7 steps north are the 7 flashbacks of memories of him within his friends' minds. Again, starting in the 6th anniversary chapter, 253, another flashback in 254, another flashback in 255. And this is the point that I made the April Fool's Day video, where we only had 3. But now, 3 weeks later, we've had 2 more consecutive Gojo flashbacks, chapter 256 and in the most recent chapter 257, bringing our total to 5. And the extra layer of tinfoil hat crazy is in this most recent one, Gojo is in the morgue, which if you want to look for kind of like an overarching symbolic story, we're seeing Gojo in the morgue sitting upright, kind of similar to how Yuji came back in the morgue before he could ultimately come back in a few chapters. And the cherry on top for this is speaking on how Gege likes to capitalize on momentous occasions or certain anniversaries, right? If the JJK release schedule kept as it is normally, like if there aren't any weird breaks or anything, then that 7th flashback would happen during Golden Week in Japan, which is one of the country's like biggest holidays, biggest celebrations. It's like a whole week-long thing. So could you imagine if Gojo came back during that? So yeah, just kind of a fun little theory that I didn't put really any stock in on April Fool's Day because there had only been 3 flashbacks, and who's to say that there were going to be 4 more in a row. But now that we've had 2 more in a row, it feels slightly more plausible. But let me just get out ahead of this. If we have, if there's not a flashback next chapter, or let's say there even is, but then Gojo doesn't come back after the 7th flashback or whatever, I still think Gojo is coming back. This is just kind of like a little theory on top of the main Gojo theory. So don't get me wrong, and don't get your hopes up if this specific thing doesn't come true, because I still think he's coming back regardless.